I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to hand it off to Tim Stout. Tim Stout is a member of our forest carbon group, and honestly, he's really a leader, the leader of our forest carbon group at Sustainable Woodstock. And it's kind of thanks to Tim that we have this event tonight with these speakers. So I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce them, Tim.
Great. Good evening, all. This is very exciting to have Stacy and Sarah on this Zoom call. We've had, just to add a little bit to Ginevra's comments, we've had a few other speakers before Sarah and Stacy. We're building on an initial presentation by Ali Kasiba, who's the Vermont climate forester. And correct me if I'm wrong, Michael and Ginevra, but I think that was in the middle of April 15th or so. Then we had Jim Shallow from the Nature Conservancy talking about another carbon program called the Family Forest Carbon Program. And both of those are, thanks to Ginevra, are on YouTube. And if you just type in Sustainable Woodstock, there's all sorts of good stuff in there. So it's if one has time, it's well worth checking that out. So our effort to educate people about how landowners, particularly landowners, can take carbon into consideration in the management of their forest. We've had a number of speakers. We've had this team for about 2 years, looking at how we get landowners, small landowners involved. And Sarah and Stacy will talk about a program that is very much that. So it's exciting to move off of, well, we're talking about 10,000 acres to what we're talking about 45 or 50 acres. It's a huge step in this field. Anyway, well, Stacy will lead off tonight, and she's the Origination Manager, which I had to look up. Stacy, I was like, Origination Manager of Forest Carbon Works, and is also a private landowner in Wisconsin. Prior to Forest Carbon Works, Stacy was an executive director of a nonprofit membership organization with extensive experience in communication and relationship building, which is critical to long-term landowner relationship development with Forest Carbon Work members. And I can't emphasize enough how critical those skills are to be able to reach out to landowners and impart the importance of what we're all striving to do. Our second speaker is Sarah Ford, a well-known forester across Vermont. She's Forest Carbon Works New England Regional Forester, providing forestry services throughout the Northeast and assisting with project origination through landowner engagement and outreach. Originally from Charlotte, Vermont, Sarah has been working in the forestry field for more than 15 years, working as a consulting forester for Butternut Mountain Farm prior to joining Forest Carbon Works. And Sarah, remind me, is that in Stowe or is that just above Stowe?
It's just above Stowe in Morrisville.
Okay. She has a master's in forestry from UVM and has worked in forests throughout New England, including spending multiple summers assisting Dr. Bill Keaton with his research at the Marsh, Billings Park, and Woodstock. Additionally, she is one of Forest Carbon Works' first cruisers. And again, she can explain what a cruiser is. We're not seeing her drive around in fancy cars, but trekking through the woods. So I will, I'll turn it over to you, Stacy.
Thanks, Tim. Actually, I am going to be leading us off here. So sorry for a bit of confusion there. So I'm going to share my screen. And again, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions and Thanks to everybody at Sustainable Woodstock for organizing this event and having us here this evening. We're really excited to be joining you, Stacy and I both. And again, I'm Sarah. I'm the regional forester for Forest Carbon Works. I work throughout New England and New York.
And as Tim shared, that I am the Originations Manager here at Forest Carbon Works. I was originally actually hired as a membership advisor, and I work with both our membership advisors as well as the landowners who are interested in carbon projects with us. Thanks so much for having us. Probably the funny thing that maybe I didn't tell Tim was that I actually applied as a landowner before I was hired on here at FCW, and our team will actually be cruising my property here in October. So I'm really excited to be here today.
So Stacy and I both are going to be tag teaming this presentation this evening. And so what we're going to be doing is going over how we got our start here at Forest Carbon Works, giving a bit of overview about forest carbon, how forest carbon projects work for us at FCW, what membership looks like with us at FCW, a bit of an overview of some of our current projects and our cruise or inventory pipeline, some more detailed descriptions of how we're doing that inventory, including what being a forest cruiser actually is, and a few frequently asked questions to get us started or launch us off, hopefully into more of a conversation. We plan to leave plenty of time at the end to answer questions from all of you who are with us this evening. So we started at Forest Carbon Works under the umbrella of our parent company, EP Carbon, which has been developing carbon projects globally for over 10 years, protecting more than 13 million forested acres. And so FCW Forest Carbon Works branched off fully last year from EP Carbon, and in doing so brought 4 team members over to our company FCW. This included our CEO and founder, Kyle Holland, who was also the founder of our parent company, EP Carbon. And so at Forest Carbon Works, we started back in 2016, actually, again, under the umbrella of that parent company, EP Carbon, with a focus on smaller landowners for carbon project development. And we did this with the launch of our methodology and completion of our first pilot inventories. And after we did this, we went on in 2018 to actually complete and verify our first carbon project in the Pacific Northwest. The year after this, we went on to initiate additional projects. And then last year, we secured investments and became a public benefit corporation. And like I mentioned, branched off fully from EP Carbon. And then from that point forward, we've continued to grow and expand throughout the country. Currently, FCW, we're based in Minneapolis, but we also have staff, obviously, here in the Northeast and in the Pacific Northwest and California, with plans for continued growth and expansion. And so focusing on smaller landowners for these forest carbon projects is significant. As Tim mentioned earlier, previously, only landowners owning multiple thousands of acres have been able to do these projects. And this is really significant if you recognize that 39.5% of the forest ownership in the country is actually comprised of small family forest owners. Here in New England, the average parcel size is actually just 56 acres. So I think, as many of us all really are aware, our forests really are this critical natural solution to helping us both mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. And the uptake of carbon dioxide is one critical function for doing this. Additionally, our forests are also helping to provide flood resiliency, temperature moderation, protecting our natural resources, and also supporting and maintaining biodiversity, just to name a few of the important functions that they're providing. And this is really important to recognize when we look at the amount of forest cover that we have here in New England and Vermont, which again I'm sure we're all aware of, having more than 80% of our state or New England forested, more than 2/3 of the state of Vermont forested. And over the last 5 to 10 years and more and beyond, we're now beginning to lose forest cover in New England and in Vermont. And so it's just really critical to work toward maintaining and protecting that forest cover across our region. In Vermont alone, we've been losing more than 4,000 acres of forest cover a year, for a total of more than 58,000 acres since 2005. And so this really just builds on just the importance that our forests are providing for us as these critical functions in maintaining wildlife and biodiversity. Just recently, our forests were recognized as providing some of the richest wildlife occurrences throughout New England. I think Jim touched on this in his presentation just last month, Maine as well. And we're now starting to suffer from biodiversity lost in conjunction with some of our forest cover in these areas in our state and in New England. So before diving into how our carbon projects work at Forest Carbon Works, I wanted to start with some information about how where carbon is in the forest, carbon storage and carbon sequestration, just some basics. I really like this slide, this picture, because it breaks down the different pools of carbon in our forest. And so what's important to take away is that there are these different areas in our forest where carbon is being stored in both biomass, dead wood, above ground and below ground. And so these pools in these areas where carbon is being stored change over time due to things such as age, disturbance, species, and time. And so what carbon projects are doing is they're quantifying or measuring the amount of carbon that's stored in 3 of these pools that are shown here. The above ground live biomass pool, so tree trunks, branches, and leaves, the roots below ground right here, and the deadwood pool. And so this is all called carbon storage. Again, that carbon that's stored in biomass. And then carbon sequestration is the actual uptake or removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthetic processes. And so as our forests age or develop, both sequestration and storage will change depending on what stage of development forests are at. And so this can be confusing because, again, we have these 2 terminologies, storage and sequestration, which are often lumped into one. And so again, the carbon sequestration, that rate of uptake, carbon removal from the atmosphere, is highest when forests are younger and have highest growth rates. They're photosynthesizing at the highest rate. And so therefore, they're having this highest rate of carbon uptake or sequestration. And so as the canopy closes and growth slows, then sequestration will slow as well in a forest stand as it's aging and developing over time. And so then we shift to having more carbon storage in our forest. So carbon is still sequestered, but just at a slower rate. So therefore, what we see is that older, more mature forests have greater amounts of carbon storage in those biomass, the above ground live biomass, the roots, and the deadwood, those 3 pools. And they also often will transition to more multi-aged, structurally complex forests, which are balancing both carbon sequestration and storage through things such as disturbance that create gaps, that release some of the younger trees, increase those growth rates and productivity, which is really ideal for enhancing and maintaining carbon in your forested landscape and forest ecosystem, which I'll touch on in more detail in the walk on Thursday. So our projects at Forest Carbon Works are participating in the compliance or regulatory forest carbon market. And this is also complicated and often confusing. this could be an entire talk in itself. I just wanted to review the difference between the two markets quickly, because there are some significant differences. The biggest difference between the compliance or regulatory and voluntary carbon market is that the compliance market is long-term. It's a minimum 100-year or more commitment. It's overseen by the California Air Resources Board, which developed out of cap and trade legislation dating back to nearly 10 years ago. This is, again, the compliance market. It has very rigorous methodologies, verification, and oversight that go into projects that are developed within this marketplace, and therefore credits that are issued. And then also, therefore, credits that come out of this marketplace or that are transacted are yielding the highest payments. The voluntary market has a shorter term time commitment. The entities that participate in the marketplace are often those that are reducing their carbon footprint, trying to achieve carbon neutrality. There may be less oversight and verification in the methodologies for projects that are participating in that market. And the payments typically don't yield as much as the compliance market projects. So again, our projects are compliance projects currently. And the type of project that we're doing at Forest Carbon Works are called improved forest management projects. And this means that the forested area that is the project or comprises the forest, comprises the project area is storing more carbon than a business as usual scenario or a baseline forest management scenario. And so what it's doing is creating additionality or more carbon storage and sequestration in that project area than would be there without the project being there. So this image shows in a bit more detail just how an improved forest management project works over the duration of the project timeline. Again, it's a pretty complicated topic to digest. And so this does a nice job, I think, of just kind of breaking it down. And so the gray dotted line at the bottom here is demonstrating that baseline that I referenced. That's determined from regional average forest lands that are inventoried on a regular basis, and also this business as usual management scenario. This green line at the top right here is showing the carbon stocking in the forest that is the project area. And you can see it rising and falling here, indicating harvests that are occurring in the project over the duration of the project. And so for a project to be viable, this green line has to be above this gray line to prove that the project is creating additionality, or what's called improved forest management. The teal area in the middle is showing the amount of additionality created by the project, which would translate to the amount of carbon offsets issued or generated from the project. And so I think that one thing that is significant that this shows is that there is harvesting that occurs over the duration of this project. Some projects focus on a more passive management approach, which is potentially fine depending on your land and what your management goals and objectives are. But I think that there's a lot of concern that many carbon projects don't allow for harvesting, which is not the case with these improved forest management projects, if that's a goal of yours as a landowner. So the credits that we are issuing or that are being issued from our compliance projects at Forest Carbon Works are really these high value, high quality credits. And this is due to a few things. The projects are long-term, like I mentioned. So there's this real level of permanence attached to the projects that I think is really important for long-term forest conservation and continued sustainable forest management, and all of these co-benefits that come with that, whether it be soil and water conservation, wildlife habitat, recreational benefits, wood products, supporting the local economy, and then all of the verification and oversight that's going into their projects is really just adding more value and integrity to the projects themselves and the credits. And so, like we've mentioned, traditionally, carbon projects really just have not been feasible for a landowner owning less than many thousands of acres because of all of these extensive inventory development and verification costs, that go into developing these projects, which just makes them prohibitive for any landowner. It's just essentially too expensive. And so what we have done at Forest Carbon Works is created this innovative approach through both our methodology and our membership services, which is streamlining access. And we're reducing some of these development barriers, but we're not removing or sacrificing any of the quality and integrity of our projects. And so now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Stacy, and she's going to walk us through in some more detail about how we're actually doing the projects and our membership services.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here tonight to share how Forest Carbon Works is creating better access for landowners to participate in the carbon market. And it actually starts off with three easy steps for the landowner. And the first step here is to create an account on our website at forestcarbonworks.com. And when you create that account, you just provide us with your contact information and you answer a few questions. The next step is to provide us information about your parcels, any conservation easements you might have in place if you're participating in a tax incentive program for your property, and other information that we need during for the application. Following that, the landowner will just have to pay that $75 application fee. And this is the only out-of-pocket expense to the landowner to find out if a carbon project will be viable on your forested land. The next step, step 3, is for one of our membership advisors to contact you, the landowner, and to review after they've reviewed the application. And once the application is approved, we'll be contacting you to have our forest technician to visit your property and take that inventory, as Sarah has done for us for a number of years. So now, how does Forest Carbon Works make these projects so accessible to small landowners? As I explained earlier, we've been able to standardize the platform with this easy online application process that I just went over. We've also been able to reduce the inventory and development and verification costs because we've been able to implement some methodologies and technologies in order to reduce those costs. There's also no major upfront costs or commitments by the landowner. So the only upfront cost is going to be that $75 application fee, and there's no commitment for us to, once we provide you with the information about your forest carbon sequestration report. And we spread as many fixed costs as possible over multiple projects in the region. And so through this, we've also been able to remove the complexity for you, the landowner. We pay you per acre per year. There are 6 renewable contracts in concurrent terms. And we here at Forest Carbon Works are really doing all of the reporting and documentation and analysis here in our offices, so that there's really very little that the landowner has to report, and we help you take care of that. We're basically removing the complexity nature. With our methodologies of hardware to software, we're able to reduce the costs and pass those savings along to the landowner. The landowner will be able to receive annual payments while our team manages the whole project from start to finish. And as mentioned earlier, it's only out-of-pocket expenses, that $75 application fee. So now you might be asking, what are the requirements and the responsibilities for you as the landowner? We have a minimum of 40 acres of private forested land as our minimum. However, we've found that properties with 200 acres or so have a much higher chance of working out financially. So what we do oftentimes is we'll try to bring these inventories together at the same time. So when our forest technician will come out and visit a property landowner with 200 acres, well, if you're nearby, we're also able to bring that 400-acre cruise in at the same time. You also own all of your timber rights, obviously because we're talking about carbon that is sequestered in a tree. Harvests must be legally allowed, but not legally required. And this helps us be able to prove that additionality that Sarah was talking about earlier. And you must enroll all of your forest ownership at that time of application. So now you might be wondering, what are your responsibilities? We're building a long-term relationship here with you, our landowner. So we want to be able to work together to coordinate future harvests, prepare and manage reporting on your behalf to the state as required during the lifetime of the project. And most of all, we want to be able to make sure that you can continue to enjoy your forested land while maintaining the carbon project. So between all the methodologies and hardware and software, we're able to reduce these costs and pass these along to the landowner and make these responsibilities and prerequisites really easy for you. And most importantly, I just want to reiterate here that we will send a cruiser, a forest technician, out to your property to do that hands-on inventory, which is so critical to the beginning steps of this process. In addition to the carbon project management, Forest Carbon Works also provides our members with other benefits. We're also doing all the ongoing project development and maintenance and monitoring. We take care of all of that for you. There are some forms that the landowner needs to fill out, but we make that an easy online form for you to be able to provide that information, and we submit it on your behalf. We'll recognize and provide you a certificate that you're an official carbon sink through our membership packets. We also will assist with any implementation of conservation easements, or if you need access to a regional forester like Sarah joining me on this presentation. We also offer access to estate planners that are familiar with land transfers throughout the life of the project. So we're happy to work with your planner to ensure that this project is maintained, because that's really important for you, the landowner, as well as for us. The carbon project is always on your individual property, and it will not be combined with other landowners, and the project will run with the land. So should it transfer at any time, we're there to facilitate that, help you facilitate that process as well in educating the new landowner. Forest Carbon Works' #1 membership benefit is to be the landowner's full service turnkey carbon project service provider to the landowners for the lifetime of the project. This is the timeline that we have that really shows the graphic of how from the time the landowner creates the account with Forest Carbon Works to the project is officially registered. There are kind of two groups here where you're really responsible for information as the landowner, and those are in those dark green areas. As I explained earlier, you can make an account, you provide us all the information, we review your application, and that moves us right into that stage where FCW takes the lead, and we're going to send out that forest technician. Many account applications are done in like 9 minutes. Review might just take a couple of days, so we can usually review your application within a week. The average is around 3 days. This is where FCW then takes the lead again, and we'll do that inventory. That information is brought back here to our offices where our analytics team takes a look at all the inventory data, and then hopefully we're able to provide you with a offer of membership and at the landowner decision, which is in column 2 here. And you can take that offer, or you can reject that offer and walk away with no strings attached. On this timeline, you might see that it says 45 days, but that's really depending on the complexity of the ownership or if they're just multiple owners. Well, we want to make sure that you have enough time to make a decision with you, your family, or other stakeholders. We have landowners who have made decisions in less time. From signing to credit issuance, the landowner payments is about 9 months. We'll provide you a down payment at the time that you accept our membership offer, and that's when the really heavy lifting starts by Forest Carbon Works. This is where we send you the membership packet. We send you some other information that tells you how we're doing, and this is where we really start getting all the information together to get the project to that development stage and eventually to registration. Once again, there's no upfront cost. The credits are sold immediately at the full value at the time, and we're managing that project for the lifetime. But what happens once the project is registered? Once the project is registered, Forest Carbon Works contracts with the landowner in 6-year renewable contracts for the 25 years of crediting. So if you take a look at this great little graphic here that Sarah created here, the first phase 1 is the crediting. So this is where we are doing that project initiation. That's when the forest technician comes out and we do the verifications, and then you get offered that first 6-year contract. You can choose to renew in phases 2 through 4, but they're not mandated. Many of our landowners agree that if you're going to commit to 107 years, they might as well generate 3 more payment cycles for that 125 years of commitment. However, I would like to caveat here that at that first 6 years, you can at that time decide, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, and go straight on to the monitoring period, or maybe you would like to work with another developer. So there are ways to end the crediting period or go for the additional 25 years of crediting. In these additional phases, the landowners will also be able to continue to take advantage of the forest growth, and that's reflected in each one of these 6-year contract periods. And we believe that the rising price of carbon over the next 20 years will only increase the value of these payments to the landowner each year of these 6-year contracts. The majority of the inventory and third-party verification costs are not as prevalent in these years, so we hope that with the rising price of carbon and the costs associated with managing the project go down, we hope that the payments we always see that payments will be consistent over these 25 years. And then you go on to the monitoring period, and there's periodic monitoring and the reporting, and that this has more flexibility for harvesting. Now Sarah is going to tell you more about our proof of methodology.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So like I mentioned, we have some projects that are underway right now. Currently, we have 8 projects happening in Oregon, Vermont, and Maine. In Oregon, we have 5 projects, including our first project, which was also the smallest project developed in the United States. 118 acres is the size of the project. It's a 4th generation family forest. The owners of this property are currently being paid approximately $10,000 a year. And in Vermont and Maine, we have 3 projects ranging in size from almost 300 to upwards of 3,000 acres, and we have hopes to be beginning many other projects in the near future. And so in addition to the projects that we have initiated in these areas, we are also really busy cruising or inventorying projects with our forest technicians all over the country. This map with these multicolored balloons shows all of the properties that we are either actively cruising or are waiting to be cruised currently. And you can see here in New England, we have a pretty robust cruise pipeline with quite a few properties that are either getting cruised right now or are waiting to be cruised. And in total, we've completed over 65 pilot inventories. We've cruised more than 26,000 acres and have over 60,000 acres in our pipeline. And the million-dollar question, how much do landowners get paid for a project? So our payments range from $10 to $20 and up per acre, per year, per property. Sometimes over $100 per acre per year. There's this amount of variability because forest types vary depending on where properties are located, whether they're in New England or in the Pacific Northwest. Carbon stocking amounts vary along with those forest types, and therefore the amount of carbon credits also varies as well, and so do carbon payments. And so, like Stacy mentioned, and we all have mentioned, our forest cruisers come to you. And so this is a really unique and great thing about Forest Carbon Works that I am really happy about being a forester, that we have forest technicians visiting every property. We have this real boots on the ground focused, combined with this modern technology in how we've streamlined our approach to be able to develop these carbon projects. And so we send a cruiser out to every property. We invite landowners to tag along if they want to get a glimpse into how this platform is working. It's an app-based technology. It's a bit different than your traditional timber inventory or timber cruises that are being completed on properties. And again, we're making offers based on these pilot inventories that we are completing, hoping to make offers. So we really stand behind what we're doing at Forest Carbon Works, like Stacy and I have both mentioned, because we're really helping keeping forests, which just because of these long-term commitment for our projects, the amount of oversight, the management services that we're providing, it's really just helping to support long-term forest conservation and sustainable forest management, in addition to helping support local work opportunities amongst all the other things that we've mentioned. And what I find to be really significant here in the Northeast, just from my experience working in forestry and just providing these extra means to help with long-term land tenureship, and whether it be transfers, reduced parcelization, and again, just maintaining forest cover and keeping our forests. So we're just about done, but I just wanted to touch on a few of the most frequently asked questions that we receive. We might have already received some of them in the chat. And so this question is one that I am fielding very frequently in what I do here in New England, especially having worked in the current use program in Vermont extensively before. And so our carbon projects, or what we're doing with forest carbon project development, compatible with current use or state tax programs, use value appraisal? The answer is yes, it is, as long as you're able to fulfill what's in your forest management plan. For example, be meeting the requirements of that plan and our requirements at Forest Carbon Works, which may mean making some adjustments to that plan. And so that's why we have regional foresters that work with us to help navigate the nuances of the tax program and our requirements at Forest Carbon Works. And another question that is being asked pretty regularly now, and is important to be transparent about, we think, is if you sign on in one carbon program with one carbon developer, could you then do another carbon project down the road? And as it stands right now, the answer is no, you can't. And so this is really important for landowners to recognize, especially as there are more and more players in the field and many different options of different lengths and year harvest deferral programs. Say you are weighing your options for participating. It's great that there are beginning to be multiple options for forest carbon project development, but it's also, I think, important to understand that your forest, as it is, can participate in one carbon project and not in another, regardless of the length of time that you commit it for. And so one final question that we also get a lot is, what if there's a big disturbance or pest and pathogen outbreak? Emerald ash borer is expanding its reach in Vermont right now, and would I be held accountable as a landowner? And so the answer essentially is no, you're not. There's an insurance or buffer pool that is set up for all projects through the Air Resources Board, that's managed by ARB and also by Forest Carbon Works as part of our membership service that we provide to landowners that will protect against these disturbances or level of disaster. And so those are just a few questions that I wanted to go over to end the talk and hopefully get us going for many more questions to follow. That's it. Thank you, everybody. And turn it over back to you. Ginevra and Tim and everybody else.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much,
Yeah,
Sarah.
thank you, Sarah and Stacy. That was great.
Yeah, a really great overview. And we've had questions coming in for a little while now. So they've kind of built up in a queue. So Michael, the director of Sustainable Woodstock, I think is going to join me here in asking questions. And you both can feel free to respond. And Tim, if you have any insight to something, you can just feel free to pop in. I see someone has their hand raised. We won't be calling on anyone. So just please type that into the chat if you're able to. So I'll just start off here with a basic question. Is Forest Carbon Works an NGO or a for-profit company?
I can actually answer that. Forest Carbon Works is a public benefit corporation.
Can you explain what that is a little bit?
Oh, sure. Public benefit corporation is more commonly known as a PBC. It's designed for a for-profit company with a strategic mission to deliver a positive impact through the company's activities. So our mission and intended benefit can be towards various causes and issues, but generally fall within the categories of social or environmental improvement or both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. The next question is, how does Forest Carbon Works membership, et cetera, interact with Vermont current use rules and our management plans, such as those approved by county foresters?
So we're in the beginning stages of our projects here. And so I'm on the Private Lands Advisory Committee for current use. Currently, there's a group of foresters, county foresters, and private landowners that works with Keith Thompson, who's the head of the current use program that takes ideas and recommendations to Mike Snyder, our forest commissioner. So the short answer is there's quite a bit of interaction. I interact frequently with the consulting foresters that are already managing the properties that are our members or our active projects, and to help navigate any changes that may need to be made to the management recommendations on those properties. And so there isn't one answer fits all. They're site specific for each property. And so it's possible that some properties that are in current use based on the management recommendations, and really it's the management goals, may not work for carbon management. It depends on how much timber you want to be cutting or how much harvesting you want to be doing. And so, but currently there's quite a bit of interaction between Forest Carbon Works and the current use program in Vermont. And I could go into a lot of detail about that, but I think I would be happy to answer more offline specifically if anyone wants.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Our next question, can a landowner still harvest firewood for home heating, perhaps on a small portion?
Yes, we do allow for that. It's in the membership agreement. So yes, that is totally allowable for that. Something we take into consideration, whether it's for recreational fires on the property or for home heating. That's a great question.
Thank you, Stacy. The next question is, our land is currently enrolled in Wisconsin's forest law program, which requires cutting, but we're considering backing out of it and paying the penalty. I realize we would have to do this to enroll in your program, but can we apply before doing so?
I'll actually field this call because my property is actually in Wisconsin. So I'm assuming this question is regarding the MFL program in Wisconsin. MFL, there is some information on the Wisconsin DNR website that does recognize carbon as a potential part of this type of program. I haven't personally dug into this a lot, but depending on what the cuttings are required, it could be worked into the agreement depending on how many acres that the landowner has and when their next harvest is scheduled. So for example, in my case, I'm not scheduled for another harvest for 6 years. And that is, we currently are saying, please don't harvest for 6 years, but depending on the land acreage, it could be possibly worked into the agreement. So you don't need to back out or say that you're not in the plan before you enroll with us to be able to see if a carbon project is viable. So I would say go ahead and just provide us your information and we'll take a look at it and work with you through it.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you. Our next question, how much of credits sold in the compliance market does Forest Carbon Works take versus what it pays the landowner as a percent? So
I can field this question a little bit, and Sarah might have a little bit to add in too. So once the credits are issued by the California market, first of all, California does take out a little bit to put into the buffer pool. So if there is a natural event, the buffer pool is available to all of the project areas. Once the credits are issued, Forest Carbon Works immediately sells those credits, and then we take all of the costs associated with creating, managing, and registering the project from that, and then the remaining part is paid to the landowner over the 6 years of the contract period. The percentage of those costs vary greatly, vary at some points depending on how large the land is, how many other landowners, and what our fixed costs are. What we do is if we find out that a project is viable, a landowner will actually get a pro forma detailed statement that goes pretty detailed and tells you exactly what all the costs are and what the payment structure is. And that's provided at the time we make a membership offer to a landowner. So it's really very specific to each landowner, but we do provide a clear outline of what that is because we're starting a long-term relationship with each one of these landowners. So we want to be as transparent as possible in informing them about what they're agreeing to.
And that's why we have that $10 and up per acre per year viable project credit payment amount, because once it gets above a certain amount that comes out of that credit payment, going to offset all the costs, it's just too large and the landowner wouldn't be getting money to make it a viable project for both them and for us as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next question also answers my question that follows, so we'll ignore mine. Can multiple landowners combine timber rights in order to reach the 40-acre minimum?
Unfortunately, no. We don't aggregate landowners together. Each project is individual to a forest owner's individual project. Now, that's not to say that if there's multiple owners or in an LLC structure, then that would be a different case or organizational basis.
Thank you.
This person writes, I am part of a group that owns 100+ acres in Lyme, New Hampshire, but Lyme zoning doesn't in practice let people cluster development and protect forests and open space. Do you know of any towns that have zoning that supports enrollment in a forest carbon protecting project?
I don't. Sarah, do you have any information at this one for this one?
I don't know on a town basis. I know there's starting to be legislative movement on the state level to try to support and promote enrollment in carbon projects. We are working with a Maine carbon task force to put together information for them about opportunity and options for enrollment for landowners across the state of Maine. It's in their legislation right now that they're trying to essentially promote and carbon projects across their landscape and on the voluntary enrollment of carbon projects for their population. So, which is wonderful, but that's all that I know of in regards to that.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. The next question is, have you heard of Sylvia Terra?
Yes, we
have. And honestly, that's why we had that frequently asked question about the transparency regarding if you sign up with one carbon project, you can't sign up with another. Say the year harvest deferral at Sylvia Terra, which is also now rebranded as NCX or NCAPX, or I think NCX, that will make your property ineligible for a future carbon project. So there's just a lot it's confusing. There's a lot of information out there. It's not all the right information. They haven't actually verified their methodology yet, which I failed to mention in my part of the talk. Our methodology is the only methodology that's actually been verified fully for small carbon project development, which is something else that's really significant about what we're doing.
Maybe you could just quickly say what that means to have the methodology verified.
Sure. And Stacy, feel free to jump in here. There's a really extensive peer review process through these oversight committees. And so there are these different registries that are providing oversight to the carbon markets. And so all of they're the ones who are actually verifying these different methodologies that developers put forward for new ways of developing carbon projects. And so it's kind of trying to remove like the Wild West approach for carbon project development, which is really important to really add clout to what we're all doing. And so the peer review process is lengthy, takes a very long time to get all the way through it. And there's much more to the process than just that. Stacy, I don't know if you have any more details to add about actual methodology verification.
Yeah, so we, for carbon credit standards here for Forest Carbon Works, we're using the American Carbon Registry, ACR, that we operate only in the California Compliance Market, or ARB.
Thank you.
I see Tim might be signaling time.
Well, we're getting a little close to 6:30, but I wanted to pop that in because we do have a question later about methodology. So just knock it out of the park, 2 in 1.
Great.
So the next question, who is making the payments to the landowner? Is this from a government program?
It's not a government program. I mean, the California is running the California compliance market, but the payments come from that registry, and then we pay the landowner from the sale of the credits. I hope that answers that question. It's kind of a, Sarah, does that seem like it answers it for you too as well? Thanks.
Thank you. The next question is, how many years have you been doing this?
So we started in 2016, so 5 years is when we actually began developing this approach and this methodology. We started our first pilot inventories. We verified that first project in 2018. FCW started with EP Carbon. EP Carbon has been doing carbon projects all over the world for 10 years. And so as far as carbon project development, know-how, skills, and experience, we have quite a bit of experience within our company, especially in that we brought people from EP Carbon over to FCW with the launch, the official branch off from FCW. We maintain a close working relationship with EP Carbon as well in what we're doing right now. So 5 years.
And if I can just
Go ahead.
add in here, when Sarah and Stacy were talking about methodology, it's important when talking about carbon credits to appreciate that there are lots and lots of entities out there that don't believe that you can actually earn money off of forest carbon credits. And they wonder, well, how can you actually calculate that? What's the methodology? And that's what, in part, what Sarah and Stacy were talking about, is that you need these standards to stand up to intense scrutiny by statisticians and mathematicians and financiers, so that we know that a carbon credit has value. So it's enormously complex. And what's exciting about a program like Forest Carbon Works is that they've come up with a methodology that has simplified it. I mean, I'm sure it took you years to get that approved, because people scrutinize everything. but now that's available to landowners. So correct anything I said, but that's my perspective.
It's very well said, Tim. Thanks. You're right on.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I want to call out that it's 6:29. Are you okay to go 5 minutes over? You can say no.
We'll be here for as long as the questions keep coming.
Don't say that.
I agree.
Be here all night. No, we just have a few more. I have a question here that's kind of related to the Sylvia Terra question. So how are these projects different than the Nature Conservancy?
So I think what the Nature Conservancy is doing is really cool. It's a different approach from what I've gleaned from when I saw Jim's talk. And so they're giving payment for practice. And so it sounds like they have different practices, forestry practices that enhance carbon storage and sequestration, for which the carbon offset sales will go to the landowner to support these forestry practices on their properties. And so some of this can go toward the development of a forest management plan. And then the other parts of these payments can go toward the actual forestry work. And so I don't know beyond that, how they're actually overseeing the use of these funds. And their projects are also in the voluntary market. And so they have different contract lengths and they're shorter term. And it was a little unclear to me just what those payments are. But from what I also took away from Jim's presentation is that they are, I think it sounds like quite a bit less than our payments when you actually get down to the dollar value that the landowner will be receiving. And so ours are just payments that landowners are receiving. The Nature Conservancies are payment for practice. They're supposed to be put toward forestry work on the property.
Thank you. The next question I think you've covered already. What methodology and standards are your projects using? Is there anything you wanted to add or pardon?
So that's the one I was trying to sneak in there earlier. But if there's anything you want to add, go for it. No.
I don't think so. I think we've talked about it a bit.
If land is sold or inherited, does the carbon project stay in place with the new owners?
Yes, the carbon project will run with the land. So if the land is transferred to new ownership, then the new landowners would be the people in charge of the carbon project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This person is wondering that, people, okay, I'll just read it. People pay to be able to pollute communities and the money goes to wealthy landowners in Vermont. The landowners have to do very little. How is this right for polluted communities?
Well, I do have one thing that I will add about that specifically. So it's certainly a difficult topic for a lot of people, this whole idea. And so one thing that the Air Resources Board in California is doing specifically with money generated from the sale of carbon credits is that they have tagged, I think, 35% of those funds to go to marginalized communities. And also all of the money goes toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Granted, it is in the state of California, but that's currently the way the marketplace is set up. What I hope is that that will expand outside of the state of California into the Midwest and the Northeast, because we have similar marketplaces in these areas, but there just isn't a place for forest lands to participate in those marketplaces. And so not that the voluntary market isn't also providing opportunities as well, but that's just one specific way in which these marginalized communities are actually being addressed, because this has been brought up to the state of California, at least with what they did with their legislation. Stacy, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The next question is, you haven't answered the percent income questions. So can you please give a range of percent paid to the landowner?
Are they talking about percent versus the percent that you as an organization get?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, because earlier it was for how much of the credits sold in compliance market does Forest Carbon Works take versus what it pays to the landowner. So yeah,
So
uh,
the bulk of the costs for developing these projects is going to that third-party verification that Tim mentioned, because there's so much happening in the scrutiny of the methodology and the algorithms and the models, and you're bringing in actual other people on site to these projects. Our third-party verifier is SNA Carbon, and so that we've been working with for years in our projects. And so it's like Stacy said, it's really hard to give an actual percent as far as what the landowner gets versus what we're getting, versus what's going to verification. But verification is an expensive part of these projects, which is why traditionally, you've needed to have many thousands of acres to actually get any money back to the landowner. And landowners also have been responsible for upfront costs to even like consider doing these projects until now.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, the only upfront cost to the landowner is that $75 application fee to be able to get to that stage to be able to see exactly how much it's going to cost and what the payments are to the landowner, and the landowner can walk away with no strings attached, because it really depends. I mean, there's multiple things that go into the way that those costs are spread across landowners. A lot of our fixed costs, like Sarah's talking about with the third-party verification, but also it starts at the very beginning. If we can have more landowners interested in a specific area and the field technician is able to come out and, cruise 5 or 6 landowners, we can amortize those costs along all those landowners versus sending one cruiser to cruise one landowner's property. So there's a lot of ways we try to streamline it, and as well, the price of carbon continues to rise. So we want to be able to have that the current price at the time we make that offer to the member, to the potential member.
Thank you.
thank you. So let's just do the next 2 questions, and then I think we'll end tonight since we're already a bit over. So the second to last. Can you give some examples of what sort of entities will be buying carbon credits from the market?
So there are, I think, something like 450 entities that are participating in this cap and trade legislation in California. And this can be a bit of a sensitive subject with a lot of people. It's big industry. It is in part, they're some of our fuel production facilities, and but it's important to recognize that only 8% of emissions from these entities they're only allowed to purchase offsets for 8% of their emissions. So they have to reduce their emissions for the remainder of their emissions to meet this legislation. And so it's a very small portion of their emissions for which they're allowed to actually purchase these offsets. With how we function right now, we do rely on them currently, and for just our day-to-day usage. And then also something that we do have the ability to do with our credits is convert them to the voluntary market to bring more local opportunities to local buying opportunities in the Northeast and hopefully Vermont. And so we're looking for that avenue. Part of the issue is that the price for a compliance credit is just so much higher right now in the market that's just why we're there currently at this stage in our growth of the company. It's $13.54, I think I just checked this morning, and projected to rise per credit. And it's significantly less than that for a voluntary credit. So.
And I guess the last question would be, this is a multifaceted question. how is the price per carbon credit per acre determined? And what percent of the credit does the PBC retain versus the landowner? Can you give a rough estimate of the percent that has been taken on a 2,500 acre property in New England?
Well, I'll field some of this question. Maybe Sarah will be able to fill in. So we can't give an estimate right here based upon just the acreage and the location. As Sarah alluded to in the presentation, it really depends on the forest body makeup and the overall forest type that the landowner has. That's why we send the forest technician out to do that inventory to be able to see how it compares to that common practice value so that we can have the additionality. We don't retain any of the credits. They're all sold at the time that they are issued.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add to that, Sarah?
Nope, that was perfect.
Okay. Well, I think we'll end there, a little bit over time. Thank you both so much for staying on and answering people's questions. I will follow up with an email with whatever info you two want to include, so people can go on the website and contact people, maybe yourselves, affiliated with Forest Carbon Works, and any other info you want to include. So thank you both so much. I think that wraps everything up.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank you, Sarah and Stacy, and also recognize Tim's role in reaching out to Forest Carbon Works to set up the program, and Jennifer's doing always such a great job with the project. So thanks, everybody. It's great to see you. And that's a really great presentation. You answered some really important basic questions for everyone here tonight. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing. We just think it's so wonderful on so many levels. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to, be in presentations like this to really help landowners understand our methodologies and how we work and how they can participate in this market. It's very exciting.
Thanks. We're going to actually be working on a basic guide for landowners to manage their forests for carbon storage and sequestration. And there are some really great graphics and information in your presentation. If it's okay with you, I'd love to reach out with you at some point and touch base, because those just really clarified some really important points.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly be happy to share that with you.
It's nice to hear that Sarah and I worked really hard on this presentation to make it understandable for all landowners.
Definitely.
You did a great job. Thank you, Sarah and Stacy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks. Thanks for the questions, everybody.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks
it.
for the
They were great.
question. Yeah, and please feel free to reach out after with any questions. As was already mentioned in this presentation, we're here to answer as many questions as possible.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Good
thank
night.
you.